So the envelope didn't make sense right away. It was thick, cream-colored, the kind you'd expect for a wedding invite, not from a vendor that had already been flagged and quietly cut months ago. And the courier, he barely made eye contact, just handed it over and rushed off like he didn't want to be seen. Michelle didn't open it at her desk. Too many eyes. Instead, she slipped it under her arm and headed somewhere quieter because something about it felt off. She didn't rush it. That was the first thing. Michelle waited until the archive room door clicked shut behind her before even looking down at the envelope again. It felt wrong in her hands. Too stiff, too deliberate. Like it had been prepared for a moment, not just delivered. She peeled the seal slowly, careful not to tear anything. Inside wasn't a loose stack of papers or some rushed printout. It was a folder. Glossy, laminated, the kind of presentation material companies use when they're trying to impress investors or close a deal. The Jenkins and Alder logo sat clean in the corner, and just beneath it, embossed in silver, was a title that made her brow tighten slightly. Performance recognition, Q3 and beyond. Okay, that was already strange. They weren't even active anymore. They hadn't been for months. Michelle opened the folder. The first page looked normal. Too normal. Projected payout incentives, laid out in a clean, professional table. The formatting was flawless fonts, consistent, spacing tight, everything aligned the way someone meticulous would do it. She flipped to the second page, aggregate bonus structures by division, again, polished, corporate ready, like it had come straight out of an internal report. Her fingers slowed as she turned to the third page. Future margin targets, adjusted forecasts, the structure of the model. It felt familiar, not just similar. Familiar in a way that made something in her chest tighten. The way the columns were grouped, the way the summary cells were calculated, even the order of the sections. She didn't move for a second. Then she flipped to the next page, and that's where it broke. Page 4 had a table labeled Cumulative Incentive Flow Approved Disbursements. Her eyes scanned it once, quickly, then again slower, and then they stopped. And then there it was. A vendor bonus line, $48,500. Tagged with an internal vendor code that she recognized instantly because she had created it. Not for a recurring vendor, not for anything public. It was a one-time internal code tied to a very specific contract. A controlled entry. Something that never left the finance team, never showed up in external documentation, never got shared outside a handful of locked conversations. Her grip tightened slightly on the edge of the page. That code should not exist here. Her eyes moved down the table. Slower now, more deliberate. And that's when the second wave hit. 3 of the 5 line items, 3 had margin projections that she knew by heart. Not because they were official, but because they weren't. They came from a draft she had built herself. A private version. One she had saved locally, never uploaded, never circulated, never even sent for review. That file lived on her hard drive. Nowhere else. Michelle felt something cold settle behind her ribs. She flipped back a page, then forward again, just to be sure she wasn't misreading it. But no, it was all there. The same structure, the same assumptions, even the slight overestimation she had flagged for herself to revisit later. And then she saw it. Bottom right corner, faint gray text. Prepared in collaboration with internal finance team, MT. She didn't blink, didn't react outwardly. But her hand stopped moving completely. Mount. Her initials. Printed like a signature, like she had helped build this, approved it, signed off on it. She hadn't. Not a single piece of this had ever been finalized, let alone shared. Michelle turned the page again. Slower this time. Each chart more detailed than the last. Growth projections, incentive ladders, footnotes referencing internal logic that only someone inside the system would understand. It wasn't just copied data. It was constructed to look real, convincing, intentional. But underneath that polish, it was wrong. Not sloppy wrong, not accidental. Engineered wrong. Numbers slightly inflated. Relationships between variables adjusted just enough to pass a glance. But not enough to hold up under scrutiny. It mirrored her models perfectly, but with a twist like someone had taken her blueprint and quietly rewritten the ending. She closed the folder halfway, then opened it again. Flipping through faster now, page after page, every section carried the same pattern. Familiar structure, foreign intent. This wasn't someone guessing. This was someone who had access. Her breathing stayed steady, but her thoughts sharpened, organized. One detail locking into the next, because the deeper she looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mix-up. It wasn't a vendor misunderstanding a template or pulling from outdated materials. You don't accidentally recreate internal draft models that never left a personal drive. You don't accidentally stamp someone's initials on fabricated projections. You don't accidentally build an entire narrative that makes it look like those numbers came from inside the company. This was deliberate. She placed the folder flat on the table, palms resting lightly on either side of it, just for a second, letting it settle. Because now the question wasn't what this was. It was why it had been sent to her. That thank you on the envelope came back to her. The loopy handwriting, the almost cheerful tone. It wasn't gratitude. It was acknowledgement. Like someone was saying, we know you'll recognize this. Michelle exhaled slowly, almost silently. Then she went back in, flipping to the earlier pages again. This time not reading, but verifying, cross-checking in her head. Patterns, structures, logic chains. Every confirmation made it worse, because it meant whoever had done this didn't just have her data. They understood it well enough to rebuild it, alter it, weaponize it. Her fingers paused again on that footer. Mount. A clean, quiet insertion, small enough most people wouldn't notice, but obvious enough to matter if anyone else ever looked closely. That's when it clicked fully into place. This wasn't about the numbers. The numbers were just the vehicle. The real play was attribution. Make it look internal. Make it look approved. Make it look like it came from her. She leaned back slightly, just enough to create distance between herself and the folder. Not out of fear, just calculation. Because if this document moved upward, if it reached audit, leadership, anyone outside this room, it wouldn't be seen as a random vendor submission. It would be seen as something built with inside collaboration. Her collaboration. And once that idea existed, once her name was tied to it, it wouldn't matter whether she had actually touched it or not. The damage would already be in motion. Michelle closed the folder completely this time. No sudden movements, no panic. Just a quiet, deliberate decision forming underneath the surface. Someone had taken her work, reshaped it, and sent it back to her like a message. And messages like that, they're never accidental. They're meant to be found. She picked up the folder again, holding it a little differently now. Not like a report, not like a mistake. More like evidence. Because whatever this was, it wasn't finished yet. The next morning didn't feel dramatic. That was the strange part. No tension in the air, no sense that anything had shifted overnight. Just the usual hum of keyboards, muted conversations, coffee machines hissing in the background. Michelle walked in like she always did, on time, calm, folder tucked neatly under her arm. If anyone had looked at her, really looked, they wouldn't have seen anything different, and that was intentional. She even stopped by the coffee station before heading to Brent's office. Poured one for herself, then another, the way he liked it. Extra cream, no sugar. It felt almost routine, like she was leaning into the normalcy on purpose. Because if this was what she thought it was, she needed to see how far it reached. She knocked twice. Inside, Brent was already pacing, headset on, mid-call. He glanced up, held a finger up without breaking stride. Michelle nodded once, stepped in quietly, and placed the folder on his desk, right in the center. Not hidden, not emphasized either. Just there. She stood and waited. Yeah, we're tracking to that, he was saying. Voice smooth, almost rehearsed. Yeah. Michelle's here now. We'll align on numbers. He let out a small laugh at something on the other end. That polished kind. The one that sounded more like performance than reaction. Then he tapped his AirPod, ended the call, and turned toward her. All charm, all ease. Morning, he said, smiling. What's this? Michelle didn't return the smile. Got dropped off yesterday, she said evenly. Courier, marked for me, from Jenkins and Alder. The shift was immediate. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there. The smile didn't fade slowly, it disappeared, like a switch flipped. For just a second, Brent didn't say anything. He looked at the folder, not touching it yet, just looking. I thought we cut them loose last quarter, he said finally. Voice more careful now. We did, Michelle replied. A beat passed between them. But the contents are off, she continued. They reference internal projections, ones that were never shared externally. Some of the modeling is mine. Draft versions never uploaded. That got his attention, at least on the surface. He reached for the folder then. but not quickly, not curiously. More like someone reaching towards something they weren't entirely sure they wanted to touch. He opened it, flipped through the first page, then the second. No reaction, just silence. Michelle watched him closely, not the pages. Page 3, a slight tightening at the jaw. Subtle, most people wouldn't catch it. Page 4, his eyes paused longer, just a fraction, but enough. Then he closed the folder, deliberately, neatly, and set his hand on top of it, like he was done. Leave it. The words landed flat, controlled, too controlled. Michelle blinked once. Excuse me. He didn't repeat himself, just gave a small, dismissive gesture toward the folder. We're not pursuing this, he said. Probably some intern screwed up a template. You know how these vendors are. Copy-paste warriors. His tone had shifted again. Casual now, almost bored. Don't worry about it. Michelle didn't move. Brent, she said. Voice steady but firmer now. This isn't a formatting issue. The data matches projections that were never shared. Payout amounts tied to codes that don't exist in any vendor system. Michelle, he cut her off. Not loudly, but sharply enough. There was something in the way he said her name. Not irritation, not confusion. A warning. Let it go, he added. Quieter now. Consider it closed. That was the moment, not the dismissal itself. That could have been brushed off. Managers shut things down all the time. It was the absence of everything else. No questions, no curiosity, no concern. Just closure. Pre-decided. Michelle felt something shift in her stomach. Not panic, not yet. More like a floorboard creaking under weight. You're not understanding what I'm saying. She tried again. Slower this time. More precise. They sent this to me directly. They used my initials. Brent. It's formatted like I signed off on it. He leaned back in his chair then, folded his arms, and for the first time since she'd walked in, he stopped performing. The charm was gone. The ease, gone. What replaced it was quieter. Tighter. You've always been smart, he said, voice dropping just slightly. So trust me when I say this isn't your concern. Michelle held his gaze. If someone at Jenkins screwed something up, it'll get handled, he continued. But don't go chasing shadows. All right, you've got better things to do. There it was. Not reassurance. Deflection. And underneath it, something else. She couldn't name it right away. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. Flickering just beneath the surface of his expression. Fear. Not fear of being wrong, fear of being exposed. It was subtle, buried. But once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. And that's when everything locked into place. This wasn't about a sloppy vendor. This wasn't about an intern misusing a template. This was containment. And Brent wasn't surprised by the folder. He was managing it. Michelle didn't react outwardly. Didn't push harder. Didn't escalate. Because pushing now would only tell him what she knew. And she wasn't ready to show that yet. Instead, she nodded once, slow, controlled. I'll delete the copy, she said. A lie. But it came out clean. Brent relaxed just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but she saw it. Good, he said. Let's stay focused on Q4. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just walked in with evidence of something deeply wrong. Michelle picked up the folder. For a second, their hands almost crossed over it, his resting on the desk, hers lifting it away. And in that small, almost invisible moment, there was tension. Then it was gone. She turned, walked to the door, and opened it. Behind her, Brent had already shifted back into motion, reaching for his phone, slipping back into whatever version of himself he needed to be for the next call, like this conversation had never happened. Michelle stepped out into the hallway, closed the door softly behind her, and only then did she let her expression change. Not into panic, into certainty, because now she knew this wasn't a question of whether something was wrong. It was how deep it went. And Brent had just answered that without meaning to. She didn't go back to her desk right away. Instead, she walked past it, past the rows of cubicles, past the break room, kept moving until she reached the small server closet the IT team used like a makeshift war room. She slipped inside, badge clicking the door shut behind her. The hum of machines filled the silence. That's when she pulled out her phone, opened her secure vault, watched as the scanned files, the ones she'd already backed up, finished syncing to an off-site location. Safe, untouchable. Then she opened a new document. Blank screen, cursor blinking. She titled it simply, Conversations or Jenkins Incident, and she started typing. Every word he'd said, every pause, every shift in tone. Leave it. Not your concern. Don't go chasing shadows. She wrote it all down while it was still fresh, still exact. Because this wasn't just about what he'd said. It was about what he hadn't. No questions about the data, no request to review the source, no escalation to audit. Nothing. Just a door closing. Deliberately. When she finished, she saved the file, sat there for a second, staring at the screen. She hadn't planned for this, not exactly. She'd expected confusion, maybe concern, maybe even a scramble to figure out what had happened. She hadn't expected dismissal. Clean, immediate, controlled. That told her more than any admission could have. Michelle closed the document, slipped her phone back into her pocket, and stepped out of the server room, back into the normal office noise. But it didn't sound the same anymore, because now, every conversation, every glance, every closed office door carried a different weight. She walked back to her desk, sat down slowly, and opened her laptop, not to continue her usual work, but to begin something else entirely, because Brent thought he had just shut this down. He thought he had contained it. What he didn't know was that Michelle had already moved past the point where his approval mattered. And whatever this was, it wasn't staying inside that office anymore. Michelle didn't leave when the office emptied out, one by one. The lights dimmed across the floor, motion sensors giving up on trying to keep up with the day that had already stretched too far. Conversations faded, chairs stopped rolling. By the time the last elevator ding echoed down the hallway, she was still there, sitting in the quiet glow of her monitor. She closed the blinds, more out of habit than necessity, and pulled the folder back out. This time, she wasn't reading it like a surprise. She was dissecting it. Her laptop came alive with a series of Windows internal dashboards, archived reports, secured folders she rarely touched unless something was off. Her movements were calm, measured, not rushed, not hesitant, just precise. She started with the numbers Jenkins and Alder had provided. At first glance, they held together. That was the dangerous part. Percentages rounded cleanly, margins aligned with expected ranges, incentive tiers structured in a way that felt familiar. Almost comforting if you didn't look too closely. But Michelle didn't do surface level. She pulled up her archived models. Not the finalized versions, the ones that had gone through review and approval. No, she went deeper, into the drafts, the iterations that never left her control, files buried in secured directories, labeled carefully, accessed rarely. Side by side, she began to compare, line by line, column by column. At first, the matches were subtle. A percentage here, a growth assumption there, small overlaps that could almost be coincidence. Almost. Then the pattern emerged. Entire sections mirrored A. Not copied exactly, but rebuilt, structured the same way, using the same logic chains, the same dependencies between variables. It was like someone had taken her models apart piece by piece and then reconstructed them just slightly differently. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't theft in the obvious sense. It was replication. She leaned closer to the screen, scrolling slowly, eyes tracking every number. That's when she noticed something that made her stop completely. A mislabel. It was small, easy to miss. A vendor rebate cell incorrectly tagged as a quarterly incentive. A mistake she had made weeks ago while building an exploratory Q2 model. She had caught it within minutes, corrected it, and moved on. But here, it was still there. Same cell, same label, same formatting. Michelle exhaled slowly. That wasn't just familiarity. That was a fingerprint. They hadn't just accessed her models. They had accessed a version that was never supposed to exist outside her system. She kept going, pulled up payout summaries from the Jenkins document and cross-referenced them with internal payment logs. Her fingers moved quickly now, but still controlled. Queries filtering data sets, date ranges narrowing, vendor IDs aligning across multiple systems. And then it hit. 2 vendors listed in the Jenkins packet showed active payout entries, except they weren't active. She checked procurement records. Inactive. Archived months ago. No recent contracts, no approved disbursements. But the numbers said otherwise. Michelle pulled the payment history, her screen filled with transaction logs. There it was. Payments had gone out. Twice. Once under their legitimate project IDs, and again, under something else. New vendor codes. Similar naming conventions. Slight variations. Different mailing addresses. But the tax ID ranges, she froze for a second, matched. Not identical, but close enough to pass automated checks. Close enough to slip through without raising immediate flags. Shell vendors. Her stomach dropped just slightly, but her hands didn't stop moving. She dug deeper into the authorization logs. Because payments like that don't just happen. Not without approvals. She filtered by authorization ID, and then she saw her name. 3 entries, all tied to incentive packet validations, all marked as approved. Her user ID, her credentials, her digital signature. Michelle didn't react outwardly. No gasp, no sudden movement. Just a quiet stillness settling in. She clicked into the first record. Timestamp. Late morning. 3 weeks ago. She opened her calendar, scrolled back, and there it was. That same week, she had been out sick, not working from home, not checking emails, out, completely offline. She remembered it clearly: strep throat, barely able to get out of bed. And yet, her credentials had been used. She opened the access logs. VPN login, recognized device ID. Her old MacBook, the one she had turned in months ago when IT rolled out new hardware. Michelle leaned back slightly in her chair, not in disbelief, in recognition. This wasn't sloppy. This was constructed. Someone had used her old device credentials, recreated access points, timed approvals within windows where she couldn't possibly verify activity. She pulled up the approval memos themselves. The formatting was nearly perfect. Nearly. To anyone else, they would pass. But Michelle had built those templates. She knew them down to the pixel. And these, they were off. Barely. Field alignment shifted just slightly. Spacing inconsistent in places no one would think to check. Signature hashes duplicated instead of uniquely generated. Cloned, not authentic. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then she moved again, faster now, but still controlled. She created a new file, private encrypted. Chain of custody. Dates, times, access logs, IP ranges, everything documented. She cross-compared every figure from the Jenkins packet against her archive models. Marked matches in one color, discrepancies in another. The screen began to fill with highlights. Red, yellow, patterns forming visually now. A map of manipulation, cloned assumptions, inflated projections, altered relationships between variables. It wasn't random. It was targeted. Michelle paused again, just briefly, letting the full picture settle. Because at this point, there was no doubt left. This wasn't about padding numbers. It wasn't about a vendor trying to squeeze extra payouts. This was a framework, a system designed to reroute money, duplicate disbursements, and attach her name to every critical approval along the way. A narrative being built. One where, if anyone looked too closely later, the trail would lead straight to her. She whispered it under her breath, barely audible. Jesus. Not out of panic, out of clarity. Because now she understood the scale, the intent, and the timing. Her absence hadn't been a coincidence. It had been an opportunity. She moved again, pulled system login records for the exact days those approvals had been processed, cross-referenced IP ranges, internal network, same subnet. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That subnet mapped to executive offices, specifically Brent's floor. Michelle didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The connection was there. Not definitive proof yet, but close enough to shape direction. She exported everything. Secure drive, external backup. A 2 terabyte encrypted USB slid quietly into her bag. No labels, no identifiers, just data, insurance. Then she backed up her communications. Every Slack message with Brent. Every Teams call transcript. 6 months of interaction history. Preserved. She checked badge access logs. Confirmed her physical location during the approval windows. Nowhere near her desk. Nowhere near any terminal. Every piece aligned. Every gap filled. Michelle leaned back finally. Just for a second. Eyes fixed on the screen. Breathing slow, even. This wasn't chaos. It was structure. A carefully built system that relied on one assumption. That she wouldn't look closely enough. That she'd panic. That she'd miss something. Or worse, that she'd trust the process to protect her. She almost smiled at that thought, because that was the one thing they got wrong. Michelle didn't trust systems. She verified them. Her gaze shifted to the timestamp of the last falsified memo. 10:14 a.m. That same morning, Brent had stopped by her desk. Feeling better. We missed you. At the time. It had sounded normal. Now, it sounded rehearsed, like someone placing a marker, establishing presence, creating distance, an alibi. Michelle closed the memo window, saved her files, backed up everything one more time. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Because if they were willing to forge her approvals, they were willing to do more. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then finally leaned back in her chair. Not defeated, not overwhelmed, focused. Because now this wasn't a question anymore. It was a decision. They had built a system to frame her. Carefully, quietly, almost perfectly. But not perfectly enough. And now, she had the one thing they didn't account for. Proof. Not just of what they did, but how they did it, and more importantly, who had the access to make it happen. Michelle closed her laptop halfway, the screen dimming, but not going dark. The office around her was silent now, completely still. But beneath that silence, something had already started moving. And this time, she was the one controlling the direction. By the time Michelle finally closed her laptop, the decision wasn't loud. It didn't come with some dramatic realization or a moment where everything suddenly clicked into place. It was quieter than that. More like a line she realized she had already crossed. Because sitting there, looking at everything she had just uncovered, the cloned models, the duplicated payments, the approvals stamped with her name, one thing had become painfully clear. This wasn't something she could fix from the inside. Not anymore. She leaned back in her chair, eyes still on the dimmed screen. The office was completely silent now, the kind of silence that makes every small movement feel louder than it should be. Somewhere down the hall, a motion light flicked off. Michelle exhaled slowly. HR wasn't an option. That thought came and went almost instantly. She'd been around long enough to know how that played out. HR didn't exist to solve problems like this. It existed to contain them, redirect them, reframe them into something safer for the company. And legal? That wasn't any better. Legal protected the organization, not individuals, not analysts who suddenly found themselves at the center of something they weren't supposed to see. And both of those channels reported upward, toward the same leadership structure that Brent sat inside. That connection alone was enough. Michelle shook her head slightly, almost to herself. If this reached them first, it wouldn't be an investigation. It would be a narrative. And she already knew what that narrative would look like. Confusion, misinterpretation, maybe even incompetence. Or worse, disgruntled employee. She'd seen it before. Watched people get quietly erased under cleaner stories. No, that wasn't happening here. Not when her name was already embedded in forged approvals. Not when over $100,000 had already been rerouted through shell vendors. Michelle leaned forward again, fingers resting lightly on the edge of her desk. If she stayed inside the system, she'd be playing by rules that were already compromised. So she stepped outside of it. Her mind shifted then, not defensive anymore. Strategic. She reached for her bag, pulling it closer, and sat there for a moment, thinking. Because this next part, it had to be clean. No shortcuts. No traces leading back to her. 6 months ago, during a federal contract onboarding session, there had been a slide. Just one. Buried deep in a long presentation most people barely paid attention to. Procurement Integrity Reporting Channel. Federal oversight. It had looked generic at the time. A standard compliance checkbox, an email address tucked into the appendix of a PDF. Easy to ignore. Easy to forget. But Michelle didn't forget things like that. And now it was exactly what she needed. She didn't act on it from the office. That would have been careless. Instead, she packed up slowly. Like any other late night, shut everything down, and left without drawing attention. The drive home was quiet. No music, no distractions. Just the steady rhythm of the road and her thoughts lining up, one after another. Every detail of Brent's reaction replayed in her head. Leave it. The way he didn't ask questions. The way he already knew enough not to look deeper. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she wasn't second-guessing anything. Inside, she didn't turn on the TV, didn't check her phone. She went straight to her personal laptop, opened it, and then did something very deliberate. She booted into a secure Linux partition, separate from her normal system. Isolated, clean. Then she disabled her VPN, not because she didn't care about privacy, but because she understood traceability, exit nodes, reuse connections, identifiable patterns. She wasn't leaving anything behind that could be tied back to her habits. Everything about this needed to look disconnected. Anonymous in the truest sense. She opened a browser, created a brand new email account. No name, no recovery email, no phone number, just a random string of characters. Something meaningless. Temporary. Disposable. When the inbox loaded, she didn't start typing immediately. She opened a separate text editor first, drafted the message there, kept it short, cold, professional. No emotion, no accusations, just enough to trigger attention. Subject line. Compliance concern vendor activity. She paused for a second, then moved to the body. Possible performance inflation and falsified vendor documentation attached. Recommend review. That was it. No elaboration, no explanation of who she was, no attempt to convince, because real investigators didn't need persuasion. They needed direction. Next came the attachments. This part took longer. She didn't just dump everything she had. That would have been reckless. Instead, she curated, selected documents that showed clear inconsistencies, clone structures, duplicate payments. Then she sanitized them, removed internal identifiers, stripped metadata, cleared anything that could link the files back to her directly. No usernames, no device traces, no embedded history, just the data itself. Clean, objective, enough for someone trained to recognize patterns. Not enough to expose her position. She compressed everything into a single archive, checked it once, then again, then attached it to the email. Her cursor hovered over the send button. For a moment, the room felt completely still. Not tense, not heavy, just quiet. because this was the pivot. The point where everything shifted from internal problem to external investigation. Michelle didn't hesitate. She clicked sent. No sound except the faint, almost forgettable whoosh, and then nothing. No confirmation screen, no dramatic response, just a blank inbox. She leaned back in her chair, rolling her shoulders slightly. The tension finally releasing in small increments. Time passed. She didn't stare at the screen the whole time. Got up, made tea, walked around the room once or twice. But the awareness was still there, sitting just beneath the surface. Waiting. 30 minutes. 40. Nothing. Then, just over an hour later, a new message appeared. Same subject line. Automated. Your submission has been received and routed for preliminary assessment. If follow-up is required, a designated contact will be in touch. Please do not reply to this message. That was all. No acknowledgement beyond that. No reassurance. No timeline. Michelle read it once, then again, and slowly closed the laptop because that was enough. It didn't need to say more. What mattered was that it existed now outside the company, outside Brent's reach, outside any internal cleanup. She walked over to the window, looking out at the city. Everything looked the same. Cars passing, lights flickering, people moving through their routines like nothing had changed. But something had, because now the information wasn't just hers anymore. It was in the hands of people who didn't care about internal politics. People who didn't owe anyone in that building a favor. People who would follow the trail wherever it led. Michelle rested her hand lightly against the glass. Not nervous, not relieved, just ready. Because the waiting part, that was already over. Now it was just a matter of when everything else caught up. The next morning didn't announce itself. No alarms, no emails flagged urgent, no sudden shift in tone from leadership. It started like any other day. Too much coffee. The air vent blasting cold like it had something to prove. Someone arguing quietly about who forgot to refill the printer paper again. Michelle logged in, pulled up her dashboard, and waited. She didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9:14 a.m., something changed. It wasn't loud, just a detail most people would miss. The badge reader by the elevator. It turned red. Not blinking, not glitching. Solid. A second later, there was a faint click from the stairwell doors down the hall. Subtle, but final. Michelle glanced up, eyes narrowing just slightly. The green exit light above the door was still glowing, but the door itself, locked. That wasn't normal. No announcement followed, no overhead voice explaining anything away. Just quiet. Controlled. Deliberate. Michelle's fingers stilled over her keyboard. This wasn't panic. This was confirmation. Because 10 minutes earlier, she had sent her final evidence pack. A mirrored inbox. High priority channel. The kind you don't use unless you want movement. Apparently, they'd been waiting. At 9:17, the elevator dinged. Once. Then again. 2 men stepped out. They didn't look like security. No uniforms, no badges clipped to their belts for show. Just dark windbreakers. Plain, functional. One carried a clipboard, the other held a sealed yellow envelope with bold red lettering stamped across the front. Procurement oversight, active review. They didn't stop at reception. Didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. They moved like they already knew exactly where they were going. Michelle didn't turn her head fully, just enough to track them from the corner of her eye. Straight down the hall, straight to Brent's office, and then inside. No knock, no introduction, just in. The door closed behind them. The office around her stayed quiet, but the silence changed. People noticed. They always do. A few heads lifted, conversations paused mid-sentence, then resumed in lower tones. Like instinctively everyone knew not to draw attention. Less than a minute later, the intercom pinged. Soft, polite. Brent Lawson, please report to the lobby. No one reacted out loud, but everyone heard it. Because nobody pages Brent Lawson. Not like that. Michelle kept her eyes on her screen, but her focus shifted completely. She didn't type, didn't move, just listened. The door to Brent's office opened. Footsteps, measured. Michelle looked up just slightly as he stepped out. And for the first time since she'd known him, he didn't look in control. His face had gone pale, not dramatically, just drained enough to notice if you were paying attention. His eyes moved quickly across the floor, not settling anywhere. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't grab his laptop, didn't even try to smile. He just walked, a little faster than normal, too fast to be casual. The 2 men fell in beside him, not touching him. They didn't need to. It wasn't an escort in the physical sense, but it was unmistakably one. Michelle watched as they moved toward the elevators. The space they passed through seemed to tighten around them. Conversations dropped off, keyboards slowed, people stared at their screens a little too hard, pretending not to look. The elevator doors opened. They stepped in. And then Brent was gone. Just like that. By 9:30, the ripple effect started. Two directors from finance, ops, and procurement strategy suddenly had urgent meetings. One grabbed his coat mid-conversation and left without finishing his sentence. Another ducked into a conference room. Voice low, phone pressed tight to his ear. No one said anything directly, but Slack lit up. Michelle saw it out of the corner of her eye. Messages stacking quickly. UTF is going on. Did you see Brent? Who were those guys? Was that federal? She didn't open the threads. Didn't respond. Didn't engage. Instead, she minimized everything and reached into her bag, pulled out a small matte black USB drive, plugged it in. One click. One folder. Insurance_final_fullbackup.zip. She initiated the upload quietly. Screen angled just enough to avoid attention. Every piece of evidence she had gathered: chat logs, timestamps, forged memos, badge access records, server logs, everything moved across in silence. This wasn't paranoia. This was completion. Because once this crossed a certain threshold, things had a way of escalating quickly. Across the room, a junior analyst dropped her water bottle. The sound cracked through the tension like glass. Half the floor flinched. Someone muttered Jesus, followed by an awkward laugh that didn't land. Michelle didn't look up. She just kept working, opened a blank spreadsheet, and started documenting. Time, 9:14, badge readers read. 9:17, two unidentified individuals arrive. 9:18, entry into Brent's office. 9:19, intercom page. 9:21, Brent exits with two individuals. She added details: who looked up, who whispered, who left their desk too quickly, who suddenly had calendar invites labeled offsite sync. It wasn't just observation, it was structure, a timeline forming in real time. Because moments like this, they get messy, details blur, stories change. But data holds. Michelle moved through it all without drawing attention. Just another employee at her desk. Typing, working, normal. Except she wasn't part of the confusion spreading across the floor. She was outside of it, watching it, recording it, understanding exactly what it meant. This wasn't internal anymore. This wasn't something leadership could quietly manage or spin into a memo. This was external, federal, structured, and already in motion. She glanced once toward the elevator, still, closed, then back to her screen. Her fingers moved steadily, filling in the gaps, tightening the timeline, because while everyone else was trying to figure out what was happening, Michelle already knew the system had been triggered. And now it was doing exactly what it was built to do. No noise, no warning, just execution. She saved the document, backed it up, and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet settle again. Not the same quiet as before. This one had weight, movement beneath it, like something large had shifted just out of sight. Michelle rested her hands lightly on the desk, eyes steady, breathing even. Because this was only the beginning, and she intended to see every second of it clearly. The boardroom felt different the moment Michelle stepped inside. Not loud or not chaotic, quieter. The kind of quiet that sits heavy in the air. Like everyone already knows something's wrong, but no one wants to say it first. The long walnut table stretched across the room, polished to a shine that reflected the overhead lights a little too sharply. There was coffee set out, untouched, a tray of pastries no one reached for, chairs filled quickly, but without the usual small talk. Executives took their seats like they were walking into something they couldn't quite see yet. Michelle didn't rush. She carried a single folder in a leather portfolio and took a seat near the middle of the table. Not at the head, not tucked away either, just present, visible. The door opened again. Brent walked in, and right away you could tell something had changed. No blazer, no tie, just a wrinkled button down, sleeves slightly uneven, like he'd rolled them without thinking. His usual confidence gone, not entirely, but enough that it showed. He scanned the room quickly, eyes moving from face to face until they landed on Michelle. There was a flicker there, recognition, and something else. Then it was gone. He sat down across from her, didn't say anything. The audit chair cleared her throat, voice calm but firm. Let's begin. Brent was given the floor first. He didn't hesitate. Started talking immediately, words coming a little faster than usual, like he already had the script ready. There's clearly been a breakdown in documentation integrity, he said, hands resting on the table but not quite still. We've identified overlapping spreadsheet versions, some drafted prior to final vendor onboarding, others prepared by procurement without complete oversight. He glanced around the table, not holding eye contact with anyone for too long. It appears certain vendors may have leveraged internal formatting structures to gain payout approvals, possibly exploiting legacy templates that were never fully restricted. He paused just long enough to shift direction. I suspect this may tie back to a former Jenkins employee who was let go last quarter. It's possible they retained some level of access or documentation that allowed them to manipulate internal-looking materials. There it was. External blame. Clean, convenient. Michelle didn't move, didn't interrupt. She just listened. The CFO leaned forward slightly, voice sharper. So you're saying the duplicated disbursements, the inactive vendor payouts, the approvals tied to internal accounts are the result of clerical overlap and a rogue contractor. Brent gave a small shrug. I'm saying we can't rule out external manipulation. These templates are widely used. It's not uncommon for confusion to happen when multiple departments are involved. Confusion, that was his angle. Blur everything, make it messy enough that no one could pin it down cleanly. Michelle waited until he reached for his water glass. Then she moved. No rush, no dramatic gesture. She opened her folder. The same one. But now the cover had changed. Government Exhibit C. Prepared by M. Thomas, she slid it across the table toward the audit chair. The motion was quiet, but it pulled every eye in the room. This is the document that initiated the review, she said. Voice steady, delivered directly to me. The audit chair opened it, flipping the first page slowly. Michelle continued it. Inside, you'll find internal data structures replicated from restricted draft models. These were never uploaded to shared systems, never distributed externally. She leaned forward slightly, just enough to anchor the moment. Pages 3, 6, and 9 contain projections that mirror my personal draft versions, including formatting errors that were corrected prior to any official release. The room stayed silent, but the tension shifted. From uncertainty to focus. Brent opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. Michelle didn't look at him yet. And then there's this, she said. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a printed still image, color corrected, time stamped, clear. She placed it on the table and slid it forward. The audit chair leaned in. Others followed. It was Brent, standing in the lobby, receiving the same folder from the courier. Time stamped earlier that morning, before it ever reached Michelle. Lobby camera footage, Michelle said calmly. Pulled this morning, timestamp aligns with initial delivery. Brent accepted the original version directly from the Jenkins subcontractor. The air in the room shifted again. Sharper now. Focused. Brent's hand froze around his glass. His voice, when it came, was lower. That's out of context, he said quickly. I didn't know what was inside. It was handed to me. I passed it along to finance. Michelle finally looked at him, didn't raise her voice, didn't push. You didn't think to mention that when I brought it to you, she asked. A beat. When you told me to leave it, he flinched. Small, but visible. Silence spread across the table. Heavy now. The audit chair looked between the folder and the image, then back to Brent. Do you deny receiving this? Brent swallowed. I assumed it was a standard client briefing, he said. We get handoffs like that all the time. No, you don't. The CFO cut in. Sharper now. You've had couriers flagged before for bypassing protocol. Brent didn't respond. Michelle leaned back slightly, not retreating, settling. Because at this point, she didn't need to push. The evidence was doing it for her. The narrative he'd built external confusion. Rogue contractors was already cracking, and the room could see it clearly. No raised voices, no accusations thrown across the table. Just facts. Lined up, unavoidable. Brent's posture shifted in his chair. Less controlled now, less certain. The version of him that used to command the room wasn't there anymore. In its place was something quieter, smaller. The door opened. Not a knock, not tentative. It swung open with purpose. Two men stepped in. Suits this time. Clean, structured, unmistakable. The taller one glanced briefly toward Michelle, then focused on Brent. Mr. Lawson, he said, voice even. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather wallet, and flipped it open just enough to show the badge. Office of Inspector General. The room didn't move, didn't breathe. You are being detained for questioning, he continued. Under charges including procurement fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of federal oversight. Brent blinked once, slow, like the words hadn't fully landed yet. The second agent stepped behind him, not aggressive, just present. Please stand. For a moment, Brent didn't move. Then the chair creaked softly as he pushed back, stood up, hands visible, no resistance, no argument, just compliance. The room stayed silent as they guided him toward the door. No one spoke. No one tried to stop it, because there was nothing left to say. As he passed Michelle, he didn't look at her directly, but his eyes dropped just for a second. To the folder. Exhibit C, still open on the table, still undeniable. The door closed behind them with a soft click. And just like that, the balance of power in the room had shifted completely. So, by the time Michelle stepped out of the building, everything felt different. Brent was gone. The system he hid behind cracked wide open. And her name, the one they tried to bury, was now the one people needed. She didn't celebrate, just kept walking. Steady, knowing this wasn't luck, it was precision. And yeah, this kind of story. It doesn't happen once. So if you're curious what comes next, you already know where to be.